So in terms of a bit of an introduction to me then, I'm probably 20 plus years now of working across utilities and across the financial services sector. You know, my background goes, and my interest in that area goes like way back, in a very geeky way to, you know, I studied business studies. I was the only person in that business studies class who actually really wanted to understand how businesses work. I think there was a lot of people there for whom it was the thing you did when you didn't know what you wanted to do. I've always been fascinated by how these kind of organisms that exist that are made up of people come together to do things, and we call them companies. So, you know, I always knew I wanted to pursue a career in understanding and helping organizations. Interesting point whereby organizations meet and they have to try and cross this boundary between the two of them, and they're all trying to satisfy their own goals and fulfill their needs, and they're all trying to do that in a financially successful way that manages risks for them. And I've spent a lot of my career in that space, so helping organizations buy better, buying better being as good a customer as you can possibly be, but also being challenging of your suppliers. And then I reached a stage in my career about 10 years ago where I'd done a significant amount of that with looking at suppliers, looking at supplier relationships, and also doing planning and forecasting with internal teams. And it felt like if I wanted to have more credibility with those people, I kind of had to go and show what I would do if I was in that situation. So if I was the person running the operation, how would I deliver that service? So that's been the other kind of key part of my career, has been both in the retail energy business and then more recently operating on behalf of an outsourcer in financial services, has been about trying to help them deliver services to customers such that I could kind of realistically go back into those commercial conversations and go, that is possible. I know it can be done because I've done it. It can be done for 30% less. It can be done much quicker. So yeah, I suppose that's a bit about me and kind of my interest in this stuff. So yeah, sad as it is, I've always had a real passion for understanding how organizations work and how they connect and work together, and then trying to turn that into practice, either to deliver commercial benefits or operational improvements for customers. It probably starts with a fascination with people. I don't think that ever came from particularly having an interest in business. That just became a lens and an outlet for it. But I think I probably by nature, and it's strange to say in an interview process when all you're going to do is talk about yourself, I'm more of a watcher. So my experience comes from observing and understanding circumstances, thinking about the question of how does that fit in context, and why are people behaving in the way they're behaving, and what's driving them. And that's the interesting part for me about problems, is fundamentally there's a whole bunch of process and rules and bureaucracy you can wrap around everything, but it's all motivated by what is driving people, either as a collective or as an individual, and how do you bring those things together, help people share that so as there is a common understanding, and then figure out how you try and meet as many people's goals as possible in a way that delivers. So often organizations' biggest problem is that they have a strong belief that they understand something and they're trying to get somewhere, and that actually when you start to unpick that, it's not necessarily really that well understood, or that it's necessarily actually going to take them to a financial goal or outcome that they want. Of organizations, for example, will talk about being customer focused and putting customers right at the heart of what they do. And when you start to try and understand, well, what is it that you think customers value about you and your proposition, often their articulation and the reality of what customers truly value are two very different things. So taking financial services as an example, yes, customers do value how quickly you pick up the phone, they do value how well you administrate their policy, but fundamentally they value financial performance of their funds. They don't interact with you that often. What they want to know is their money is safe and it's growing and it's going to provide for their future. So when you ask them what customer services is, they do sometimes talk about how quickly you answer the phone, but they're more likely to talk to you about how well the product performs. It is a good question, and you know, for some of those people who know me better, I think there's definitely a bit of an arc for them, in the sense that I've not historically necessarily been a huge advocate of consultants. I think to therefore be in an organisation that would often be referred to as a consultancy is, feels probably a quite significant departure for a bunch of people who know me quite well. I think the interesting thing, and I was talking with some of the team about this yesterday, I think, we have to acknowledge that we're a consultancy firm, but fundamentally I would see us more as a delivery partner. That's what excites me about being here, is there is a bunch of people here. They don't just want to come in and admire your problem and describe it to you. They don't even just want to come up with a solution. They want to be an integral part of shaping and trying to drive the implementation of that. I've always sought out business problems. So it's always been my nature to try and find the biggest problem in an organisation, try and get involved in it, because that's where I've always found, frankly, the most interesting work, but also the most exciting opportunity for me to progress and learn. So when something is challenging, that pushes you out your comfort zone and you learn from it. I think the opportunity to be in an organisation that is often going into clients in exactly that circumstance with the remit of fixing problems feels exciting. I think the other thing about Cross 8 is there is something truly unique in the group of people that have been brought together here. I can confidently say that a significant proportion of the most skilled people I've worked with across disciplines and across industries are here now as part of this team. And I think that gives us a unique capability to actually honour that commitment. I very much doubt anybody goes into any circumstances with the intention of not necessarily delivering customers, but I can confidently go in and talk to somebody about something I think we can do and know that we can back it up. And that's there in Cross 8's track record. So I want to be part of something that I know is going to deliver for customers. So I think those are the kind of the main blocks of it. It's always great to have some personal relationships and know you're coming to work with a bunch of people who will build a great culture on a day-to-day basis, because that's part of it too. But most fundamentally, it's the opportunity to go into clients and help, and genuinely feel like I'll be part of a team of people who've got all the capabilities you'd need to really add value. Some of it ties back into what I talked about before. I think what you tend to find is in large enterprises, over time you build up a network of, let's say, 10, 20, 30, 40 people, maybe maximum, who you trust, and they're that network of people who you go to when you've got a problem, or indeed the organisation goes to when they have a problem and they need a bunch of people to get together and solve it. Every department has that person who everybody knows is the person they go to. I think the distinction coming in here is it's just walking into a room of those people and going, actually, when I was there, I would have gone to that person because I would have known that they would have got it done and they would have had the answers. And not only can they help me or help people in getting things done, they can do that in a way that they'll do it in the right way. They'll do it in a way that leaves a legacy. So it just feels like walking into a space, that ideal room, really, where you kind of put over time in your career, not all, but a lot of the people I've really valued working with are here. I put a huge amount of emphasis on that at this stage of my career, because it's great to work with people you can trust to deliver. But there's also, I think what's been really interesting in the last week actually is also meeting a whole bunch of new people. So, for example, Wendy, who was one of the co-founders of Toby, we've never had any experience before, working together before, but I can already tell that she adds a huge amount of value to clients in the sectors that she's driving. So yeah, it's been great to get back together with people. And I think having this week, actually, we've had a strategy session, getting in the room with that audience. I think the other thing probably about Cross 8 is it's at a scale now whereby I'd kind of say we're small enough to be quick and agile, but we're big enough to be, really, really impactful. We can still get the majority of the key people in a room and thrash out a problem and deal with it and move on the day, which is a great time to be joining the business. And, you moved into a new office premises, having that hub, that place where we can bring people into to help work through clients' problems, to be able to, knock on the door and grab somebody again who, as I was able to do, and say, this problem's come up, I'm talking to this person, what do you know about it? Bring your insight in. Yeah, it just feels really exciting to be back in that environment. Yeah, I think it's funny actually. It's a bit like my comment around, describing this business as a consultancy. It is but I sometimes feel like that's got a stigma attached to it that I don't feel is a reasonable association. My experience in just 3 or 4 days is to call it an office almost feels like the wrong term for it. It is that hub space, and I think, even in the short time I've been there, you've got partner members of the Cross 8 team, you've got clients in and out of there, because it's just a great space to work. It's a great space to meet people. It's a great place to exchange ideas. So I think it's already showing that it has that value. I think everybody's searching for what does the new world of work look like. That conversation's been going on a long time. Everybody's got a perspective on it. But for me, there is always value about being able to get face to face with people, but it's the right people with the right intention in the right environment. And I think that was my experience of that hub. And the thing it really demonstrated to me was the nature of the relationships that Cross 8 has with existing clients. The fact that they want to come and work in that environment, they want to come and meet the team. They're more than happy to say this was, the things that they really like. They were also happy to say the things that they'd like to see more of from Cross 8. And there's just that exchange, and that's just a conversation they feel natural to have. And I'm not sure there's many suppliers out there who've got that type of relationship with their client, where they'd feel comfortable to do that, and they'd actively want to do it. So yeah, it's been really great to be back in the space. It's also nice to be 20 minutes away from my house. I spent a lot of time in Edinburgh the last 12 months, which is not so local and hasn't done a huge amount for my carbon footprint. So I didn't mention it as a specific motivation, but I think that there's a bit of that as well, in the sense of, trying to make some time for family. I want to be out there, I want to be meeting clients, but actually it's great to live so close to the hub for the organisation and be able to tap into that resource without it being a 45-minute flight and 4 hours in an airport away. I think the first thing I'd say is, we can talk about specialisms, and I will talk about some specialisms where I probably have focused more of my time. I think the first thing is very cliche, but I genuinely believe that my experience to date has given me the ability to understand problems in context. So I look back in my career and, I studied business and marketing. I worked in marketing, I worked in product development in my early career, I worked in procurement, spent a lot of time with legal teams and did some legal modules as part of my studying, spent time in customer services, I spent time in B2B environments. I think what that gives you is a unique ability to be able to see problems through different lenses, and that creates the opportunity to understand and find value in a way that potentially specialists don't necessarily have that. If we were trying to give it a term, we might kind of say my general outset is one of systems thinking. So my first question is less about the problem and more about the context of the problem. So I think that's the first thing I would say is, because I have worked in so many areas, I can see problems through different lenses, and that gives you the ability to connect, because very rarely is a major problem or challenge about one area or one thing. When we talk about a commercial issue, we need to cut costs with a supplier, we need to rationalize our supply chain. All things we can do, all things I have done, but fundamentally, why did you have too many suppliers in the first place? How did that fit with your operating model? What was allowing people to just pick whoever they wanted in the first place? And why did they feel the need to? Or why do they feel the need to go around your procurement system? And it's seeing the problem in that context, seeing the cost in that context. So when you talk about cost, are you able to distinguish cost into good cost and bad cost based on your strategy? So what's the cost you want to spend because it makes things better for your customers versus the cost? Because anybody can come in, and I can tell you that pretty much every organisation we will go to, on paper, will have too many spans and layers. So they'll have too many layers from top to bottom. They'll have too few people working for managers by textbook, right? And every consultancy can come in and do that piece of work for you, tell you you've got too many spans and layers, tell you you can cut 20% out. What is often not understood and thought about, and this is, I think, the value I can add, is really you need to be distinguishing between which are the teams you really want to be investing in, and you want to have that depth, and you want to invest in specialism, and you want to have narrow teams, because those are the things customers really value and are part of your value proposition, versus the stuff over here that's just grown, you don't really understand, it's organic, and customers don't, it's just grown organically and customers don't understand it. So firstly, I'd say it's the systems thinking thing. I think the second thing is then bolting in underneath that my context and understanding. So an understanding of operations, an understanding of what it takes to deliver good customer service, and understand what you sold to customers, how do you package that up, how do you deliver that in a cost-efficient way, how do you use technology where it's appropriate to do that, both at the design level, thinking about the operating model, and then taking that down into the specifics of, there's a problem here, help us with it. I think the other side of it is about that commercial lens. So understanding the market, understanding how that can fulfill your needs. And again, that comes back to understanding your value proposition. A big part and a big challenge that a lot of organizations have is when they talk to you, when they talk to us, they talk to me about their supply chain problems, is they haven't really thought through what they wanted those suppliers to do and how they fit into what is their value proposition for their customer. So it's generally been led out of a lens around a specific problem as opposed to a strategy. So we would always, or as a general rule, I would always advise to companies, don't outsource the things that are most valuable to your customers, because that's your core proposition, that's the products you offer to them. All too often that is the reality, and sometimes we have to remediate that situation, which is make it work as well as it can, and sometimes there's an opportunity to say, maybe this is something you should be doing for yourself, and then let's talk about how we optimize some of those things that aren't core to your business, that aren't necessarily the thing that customers most value about your organization, those hygiene factors. So I have expertise in all those respective areas, and I think I probably understand a fair amount I do understand about deploying and implementing IT and utilizing it from an operational perspective. So I'm not going to suggest that I'm a technical expert. I'm not going to be going to any organization and being an expert on how they should put their dev teams together. But as a consumer, both through supply chain and as an operational owner of IT products and services, I know what it takes to be ready as a business to take those products in. I know how we should be engaged in the process of deciding and bringing that technology in, and then how to get value out of it. Sure, yeah, I can draw out some examples of things that I've been involved in or led that have been successful. So there's that true sense of problem. So there's that emergency thing. So yes, I've been there. In fact, actually, the most immediate example that comes to mind is I've just spent 13 months seconded from the organisation that employed me in order to try and address some pretty deep-seated challenges with their major outsourcing partner. So major third party appointed to deliver all of their administration. And unfortunately, it wasn't working for either organisations. They'd entered into a long-term arrangement, and that arrangement wasn't delivering for the client. It wasn't delivering the level of service or the level of transformation of the customer experience that they'd hoped when they'd entered into that arrangement. And for the supplier, they were in a pretty distressed situation in terms of it not delivering for them the ambitions that they'd had, both in terms of being able to deliver that service and also the related financial challenges that came with that. So it was a really interesting situation to be in, to be seconded from the client to a supplier, both organisations having to get comfortable with that situation of me kind of stepping across that boundary, having previously been involved in the oversight of that third party, or certainly my team were involved in the oversight of that third party. So taking on 2,500 people spread across locations, whole plethora of systems, whole set of business challenges. And I'm pleased to say that I was able to get that from a position of missing all service levels to a point whereby we were able to achieve, I think, 13 of the 14 service levels that were there. Significant turnaround in terms of reduction in the headcount required to deliver that service, which is set up on a path that it will be able to continue, and is taking the account on a direction of being more sustainable. And moreover, and I think most importantly, in long-term relationships, a much better understanding between the two organisations about what they need to do differently to try and make it successful. And some of that is about acknowledging and recognising what's never going to be true that you might envisage being true at the start. The reality is when you set something out for a long period of time, so in this example 10 years, there's a lot you don't know at the start and there's a lot you learn along the way. and learning to adapt and accept those changes, even where they're painful, is sometimes critical to be able to start that healing process. As much as we might want to hold on to a belief that we had a commitment and that it was going to work a certain way, in practice it just can't. Also, I think this was about teaching the client to be a really good customer, and that's sometimes about intervening in the right way. It's about being supportive where you need to be supportive, and about being challenging where you need to be challenging, and about creating a narrative and a reality for your internal stakeholders that reflects the real situation. One of the biggest challenges in any kind of supply chain relationships, particularly big outsourcing arrangements, is it becomes very easy to direct and consider all of your problems to the supplier. So you end up in a situation, it's inevitable, it's human nature. Every time we have a challenge, it can become easier to say, well, that challenge is related to those people over there. It's fundamental. Happens within organizations, happens even more so across boundaries of organizations. And it's creating an environment where you have the right information and the right narrative so that people understand where is the real source of a challenge, and then looking to address it collectively. And value being in fixing the problem, not in finding and pointing out the problem. And that's another critical challenge in oversight for outsourcing, is by its very nature, you've created a set of people and their job is to find the problem. Because they're overseeing the situation, they're not executing the situation. The challenge is to move those overseers and the operational teams into a relationship whereby they work together collaboratively. That would be the most obvious example of this is a situation that is a burning platform, nobody's getting out of it what they need, significant financial implications for both organisations, and getting that back into a better place. Certainly learnt a lot in the last 12 months through that experience. And it just comes back to this is all about people or collections of people and how they respond to situations. Everybody will have a perspective which is based on their interest in the matter. You'll never reach a situation where everybody has a common understanding, but what you can reach is a position whereby on the critical things everybody has an acknowledgement of at least the other party's position, and you create an environment where you can have a conversation. I think there is definitely that trying to rebuild that trust and trying to rebuild that relationship. In terms of things that I would be proud of looking back in my career. So when I first went into M&G, we did some significant piece of work, initially transitioning a major outsourcing arrangement, and then subsequently that was so well received, and this is where Toby and I last worked together. So Toby and I effectively led a big chunk of the function that was set up to create the right oversight and the right commercial capability to make sure that M&G was getting value for money out of its suppliers, out of its third parties. Like so many other organisations, significant proportions of its execution are dependent on third parties. So there's a cost lens on that, but there's also a risk lens about making sure that they aren't representing an unreasonable risk to you or your customers. And then there's a service lens. And how are you making sure that you're getting the service that you require from them? That was effectively created through bringing together some pieces of the jigsaw existed, some that didn't exist, and building the whole function from scratch. And collectively, that led us into some significant improvement projects and some significant changes, which delivered, top side of £100 million of savings in terms of rationalisation and improvement of the supply chain. So that's something that I see as a real marker. That rare opportunity to create something from scratch and really fill a capability gap that had a significant impact on the success of that organisation. Probably the third example I'd draw out would be kind of going back a bit in my career to try and pick something out that's kind of gives a bit of context to some of the other stuff I've done. The last thing I did in utilities before I moved across into financial services, which is where my most recent experience has been, was working with the board at an energy supplier and driving the end-to-end process and ultimately making the recommendation for them to sign a £500 million deal around MAP financing, so meter asset procurement financing. Clearly a huge scale and a huge decision for that business, and being part of the process of deciding how to enter the market, how to talk to third parties about that, how to assess those arrangements, ultimately to get to a point whereby we built confidence that we had the right understanding of the market, we had the right understanding of the players, we had the right understanding of what was best for our organisation, and therefore to be able to take that recommendation in what is a really complicated part of the market, explain it in a really clear way, and help the board make what was a very significant decision. And ultimately this boiled down to 5 or 6 pages. After 18 months work, and me at a flip chart, kind of going, this is how MAP works, this is how the new market's going to work, this is what you need to be worried about, this is how we think we're mitigating those things, and this is why we think this is the right deal for you, and then signing off that deal. I think being able to reach a point where you can give people that confidence to make that type of decision, and I've been lucky enough to be involved in 2 deals of that size in different organisations for different types of services. So one around this is meter asset financing, one around procurement of outsourcing services. I will always be proud of the fact that people felt confident enough in what I was able to put them in front of them that they felt able to make those decisions, because they're not easy decisions to make. I think there are a whole bunch of tools, and these are the types of things we can talk to clients about, and not only to help get people over the line in terms of making decisions, but actually genuinely to help people do that assessment in a structured and useful way. So there'll always be uncertainty, and some things more than others. So you take something like that, it was a cutting edge. We were actually the first people to do a major MAP financing deal for the smart metering rollout of the major suppliers. So there wasn't a benchmark, there wasn't a test case, there wasn't somebody else who'd done it. But there's a whole bunch of tools you can put in place. So things like, reviewing your risks, but reviewing them properly and looking at sensitivities. So the what if analysis, analysing the variability of the scenario and saying, often making decisions is less about knowing it's the right decision and more about knowing that it's not the wrong decision, because you often only have enough variables to demonstrate this isn't the wrong decision, and to demonstrate to people what the implications would be if they ultimately needed to make a different decision at a future point. It's very rare that you have enough information, or the decision is simple enough when you're talking about these types of things, that you can say this is the only correct outcome. What you can say is this is the correct outcome in these circumstances based on these variables, and these variables would have to shift by this much to make it the wrong decision. And then it's a question of the order of magnitude of those variables and how confident you can get that feels like they're a sensible assessment of the situation. So this does all come down to tools for decision making that you'd apply in a commercial process, and moving away from conjecture and moving away from a scenario where you think of decisions as a one-off. Fundamentally, you have a set of variables, you have a set of inputs that allows you to make a decision, and you want to ultimately continuously reassess that decision and understand what opportunities you have to do that, and what variables would have to change in order to make it the wrong decision and take you off a different path. When I'm asked, should we go to that? When I'm asked, so I think it's probably just about finding the right subject with the right group of people. And I think it's interesting to hear my perspective, but it's way more valuable to hear that in the context of other people's perspectives, because that is the value of the organisation I'm coming into. You should hear about those things from a technologist's perspective. So the likes of, Gary's a great example. I would say, I think I would deploy artificial intelligence in this way in operations, and he'll go, well, this is how that could work from a technology perspective. So yeah, really excited to do something along those lines. I think let's pick a subject and get it lined up. So I'm a town councillor, which I took on, I suppose 8-9 months ago, because I decided post-COVID that I wanted to contribute more to the community. So yeah, that's definitely been an interesting experience. Whole different culture, whole different environment, whole different set of challenges, but really interesting to feel a bit more part of the local community and add a bit more value that way. And probably the most complex all of life's problems. I've got a 20-month-old boy. Outside of work, I would say that he's pretty predominant in how my time is occupied. So yeah, I think those are probably the 2 things that take up most of my time.